Welcome, everyone, to the Behind the Book workshop. I think this might be the most information-packed workshop I've ever created, and I'm very, very excited to share everything I learned while creating the book with you today. So first, we're going to do a little warm-up exercise. And the way it's going to work is that I'm going to share a question with you, but I want you all to wait until I say go to share your answer in the chat. And the reason why is that it's both a little warm-up exercise to kind of activate your curiosity, but it's also a way to feel connected to all of the other people who are in the room, in the virtual room with us today. And this way, we're all going to contribute our ideas to the stream of creativity and that flow all together at the same time. So I'm going to read you the question now, but remember, wait until I say go before you share your answer in the chat. So the question is, when you think about the process of writing a book, and I want you to think about it either as yourself writing a book, if that's something you're interested in, or just imagining, picturing another author writing your book. What's one word that comes to mind? So think about it for a second. And now go. You can put it in the chat. Iteration, overwhelming, thinking, tedious, intense, lonely, finally, discipline, fun, creative, exciting, strenuous, journey, hard, another hard, but in full capitals now. Jan is saying release, Matt is saying resilience, Alex is saying years, flow, difficult, intimate. Oh, this is beautiful. Synthesize. Erica is also saying finally. This is beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I think the diversity of all of the answers that we've seen here is basically showing a deep truth about what it's like to write a book. And it is that there are as many experiences of book writing as there are experiences of creativity out there. Writing a book is deeply personal and it's something you'll shape in conversation with yourself and others. So today, as usual, if you're familiar with my work, I'm not going to give you a step-by-step recipe that you can just copy and paste. I'm going to tell you about my journey, what I learned, and I want you to actively engage and always ask yourself, how does that apply to me? And what approach would be most helpful to me? Because ultimately, you'll realize that writing a book is also a series of tiny experiments. And I know this is very meta, but it all starts with observing the current gap in the market, or maybe your desire to tell a story, and then formulating a hypothesis. The hypothesis that maybe potential readers will resonate with a certain approach, and then trying things out and seeing if they worked or not. So this is basically the exact same cycle that scientists go through. So today I want you to put your scientist hat on. And really, when we go through this entire content, every time I mention something I did or something I tried, you can just ask yourself and maybe even make a note of potential tiny experiments that you could run around this to test and see if that could work for yourself. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So Maria, who's going to say hello in the chat now, is here to help me run the workshop today. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat as I go through the presentation, and she'll collect them in a document that she's going to share with me afterwards. And you'll also have an opportunity to raise your hand and ask your questions directly during the Q&A at the end. So as you want, you can do it as we go through the content or at the end. Another little piece of housekeeping is that there's going to be a piece of content towards the middle of the presentation that can be triggering for some people. So I'll call it out when we get there. And if you'd like, you can mute the meeting during that one slide, which will have a big red content warning on it. So what are we going to cover today together? Let's go through the table of contents. So first, we're going to talk about the power of building a community first, if you're thinking about writing a book, and especially if you want to work with a traditional publisher. Second, we're going to talk about finding an editor and why you need one, where to find them, and how it works. Then how to create your book proposal. Then after that, we're going to take a little creative break together It's going to be a very short self-discovery exercise that I'm going to walk you through. It's just a quiet exercise. I know some people hate breakout rooms, no breakout rooms today. It's just going to be you with your notes, quiet for a few minutes with a little self-reflection exercise. Then when we're back from that break, I'm going to explain the entire process of writing and editing the book, then the production process with the book covers, page layout, mockups, and all of that, and then the actual publication process, how to bring the book into the world. And we'll have the Q&A at the end when we can have a conversation all together. Before I go through the content, I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the timeline of how this book happened, just so you can situate everything that I'm describing as I go through this presentation. So in summer 2022 is where the idea emerged from the very first time, and I started talking to potential agents and publishers. Winter 2022 is when my agent sent the book proposal to publishers and the book went to auction. Then in the winter of 2022, this is when I sent my first draft to my publisher. In spring 2024 is when I sent the final draft, and obviously I'm going to walk you through everything that happened in between those two moments, those 2 points in time. Fall 2024 is right now. I just announced that the book was available for pre-order, and spring 2025 is when the book is going to launch. So as you can see, this is 3 full years from idea to launch. This is a really, really big project. And I personally think that it's completely worth it. So if today I can inspire some of you to maybe decide to start exploring the idea of writing a book, or if you're just curious and just want to know how does that work, how are books crafted these days, let's do this. Let's go through the making of tiny experiments together. As I said, it all starts with the community. This is the crucial foundation of a solid idea and book proposal. So what happened in summer 2022 is that all of a sudden, as if they all had decided to reach out exactly at the same time, I started getting emails from different publishers who all had the exact same question. Hey, have you thought of writing a book? One of these publishers was in France, and 2 of them were in France actually, and 2 others were in the US. And my answer to them all was, yes, I'd absolutely love that. I had always been excited about this idea, but I had not taken any steps at this stage to do it because I was completing my PhD, which, by the way, I'm actually defending my thesis next week for my PhD. So I'm almost done. But at the time, I had barely started, and I felt like writing a book at the same time would be too much to do. I was still interested, so I came back to them and decided to explore this potential idea. So it might look like the story started in summer 2022, but really it started much earlier than this. It started when I decided to write a newsletter. This graph was created by someone else, Chanel. There's the link here if you want to go and read the entire case study that she wrote about Nest Labs. But I added here a red arrow to show you when the publishers started reaching out to me and asking if I wanted to write a book. I had been writing the newsletter for an entire 3 years before that, and I was at about 40,000 subscribers when that happened. So even like the book, as you saw, was 3 years in the making, but really, if we're being completely honest, it was much longer than this. In my case, I had my community that was kind of scattered across different places. I had Twitter followers, newsletter readers, and a circle community. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because it doesn't really matter where you start building a community. It doesn't have to be a newsletter like I did. Really, all publishers want is a signal that some people are interested in your ideas. Where do those people hang out? If it's on Reddit, on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram, on a newsletter, doesn't really matter. And I know it may feel like growing an audience and building a community is like chasing vanity metrics, but if you start considering it as just a data point for potential partners to look at and decide if they want to collaborate with you, it starts making a lot more sense. And it's not just about convincing a publisher to work with you. There is real power in building a community. This is a little photo of a picnic I did at the very beginning of this journey with Nest Labs community members in London, and where I told them that I was still in the phase of trying to work with an agent, and they helped me brainstorm ideas for the book. So there are three main reasons why you may want to build a community before you start reaching out to agents and publishers. The first one is that you're going to be more certain that you're addressing real world problems because you're going to source those ideas from your community. And then you can make sure that the way you're presenting your solutions is in a way that actually resonates with your community because you can test those ideas with them, whether again, it's through your newsletter, whatever platform you decide to use. And once the book is out, you will get early support at launch because those people will have been with you during the entire journey rather than just dumping this book on them at the very last moment and saying, please buy it. It will feel like, which is the case, the book has been co-created with your community. I call this the Curiosity Plus formula. So basically, you just take an area of curiosity that you have, plus you activate it, you expand it by choosing a platform, a way to learn in public and to explore your curiosity by connecting with others. And again, that can be through a newsletter, which has a discovery engine, preferably. So in my case, I use Kids Creator Network, but you can use Substack or other tools. Or it could be a social media platform to grow your audience. Hosting in-person events where you live is also great. I've been doing that with Nest Labs in the past 2 years, and that's been really generative and nourishing. Or you can even create a podcast, interview relevant experts, and share your ideas. Curiosity plus a platform of your choice. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it means learning in public and refining your ideas in a way where you're going to progress even without realizing it. Once you have started exploring your ideas more and you feel like, okay, some of them are the kind of ideas that would deserve to be explored in a more expensive and maybe more permanent way, such as in with the book, it's time to start finding an editor. And you may ask, well, why do I need one? Why can't I just keep on working on my own on this? So I actually had no idea that this entire job existed before I started working on this project. If you follow the advice that I suggest in the first part, you will have generated a lot of content around your community and your learning in public practice. You may have blog posts, you may have newsletters, you may have social media posts, podcasts, either one that you're hosting yourself or where you've been invited, or even if you're not learning in such a very public manner, you might have transcripts with client calls, notes in your note-taking app, and a lot of content. The job of a developmental editor is to help you take all of these and turn them into a book proposal, into something that will be convincing and clear to a publisher to consider whether they would like to work with you and help you turn those ideas into a book. The way it works is that you start with a briefing. I don't know if any of you, through your work, have ever had to hire contractors or freelancers, but as you may know, usually it just starts by briefing them. You tell them literally what it is you want to achieve, who you are, what are some of the constraints that you have, whether in terms of budget or in terms of time. Then you do a few discovery calls with them. With my developmental editor, for 1 week, every day we had 2 hour Zoom call together, where she really grilled me about everything. And she asked me about all of my newsletters, my blog posts, my favorite topics, the ones that I felt like resonated the most with my audience. Then together, we worked on an outline. We performed additional research. So she helped with that, but I also went back into my archives, into my notes, and I added more content into our shared folder. Then we shared a very early draft with my agent who shared some feedback. And we went through that process several times until we were happy with the book proposal. So where do you find a developmental editor? There are several ways to do this. One of them I discovered fairly recently is by looking at the acknowledgement section of books you admire. This is a quick photo I took literally this morning of the acknowledgement section of Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he acknowledges all of the different developmental editors that he worked with in there. So you could just Google them and reach out to them. And I checked other books, Tiago Forte, Ali Abdaal, etc. And all of them, I feel like, except if something really bad happened between the developmental editor and the author, most authors will actually put the name of their developmental editors in their acknowledgement sections. I know I've done that in mine as well. So just go on your bookshelf, grab the books that you like, and check where they mention their editors and Google them. That's a way to find a developmental editor that's aligned with the vision that you have. Another way is asking authors you know for recommendations. So now that you know me, you can ask me, for example. I will very happily share the contacts of my developmental editor as well as other recommendations. Or you can just do a Google search. I did that also this morning just to check that that was actually useful, and it is. There are lots of really good results that come out. And there's also a platform called Reedsy that has a lot of freelancers specialized in helping you bring your book to life. And they do have a lot of developmental editors here as well. There's a little note of caution that I want to share. That is something that I don't think you will find on Google and that I learned from several other authors that have worked with developmental editors. There are two different structures working with a developmental editor. One of them is a flat fee. This is what I did with my developmental editor. And another one is a flat fee plus royalties, which means that your editor is going to get a share of the money you're making on your book in perpetuity, forever. I personally think that if possible, you should avoid that ladder structure for the fee and try to go for a flat fee as possible. In terms of fees, I've seen absolutely everything. It can go from $3,000 to $30,000 for some of the star editors that have worked with the biggest authors. So for James Clear and Atomic Habits, for example, I'm pretty sure that if you reached out to some of them now, and a lot of people know the little trick I just told you about of reaching out to people based on what you see in the acknowledgement section. They would probably be very expensive and out of budget. So maybe you can also look at smaller authors to try and find something that fits your budget. Or I have other friends who have just hired editors on Reedsy again, using an hourly fee, which is a lot more manageable. And now that you have found the right developmental editor, you want to work on your book proposal. I'm going to walk you through my entire book proposal. I've never shown this to anyone else outside of the close collaborators that have worked with me on my book. And I'm not going to share it anywhere else either. So I'm very excited to share this with you. And as I go through this, feel free to again ask questions in the chat or make notes of things that you want to ask me during the Q&A. So that was in winter 2022. After working with my developmental editor for 3 months, where we were through that entire process that I've described of briefing and different drafts, etc., and feedback from my agent, we finally had a book proposal. And this is the overview. Do you notice anything if you look at this? Just look at this table of content. I don't know if you noticed something surprising, but to me, that structure was very surprising. Half of it, 50% of it, is about the market, the marketing and the promotion. And the actual idea of the book and the content of the book only comes in the second half. The reason why is because traditional publishers, again, want to see whether the ideas you have might resonate with a certain audience. And then only they're happy to go and explore the idea in a deeper way. And I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind as you build your book proposal. So now let's go into the actual content of the book proposal. Let's have a look together. Here's the first page of my book proposal. Another thing you might notice here is that the title is not the same as the one it is today. And it's actually a little bit all over the place. Liminal Minds, a field guide to transitions, predictable success in an unpredictable world. At this stage, I feel like now that the book is finished and I finished writing it, I think that I wasn't 100% clear yet as to what the idea was. I had many interesting ideas I wanted to explore, and I think with my developmental editor, we did a really great job at packaging them in a way that could communicate that vision and inspire potential publishers to work with me. But there was still a lot of work to do afterwards in the actual writing of the book. And so that's one first lesson here is that although, of course, you need to structure your idea in a way that makes sense for publishers to understand and to be excited about, it doesn't have to be 100% final at the stage of the book proposal. You will still have opportunities to change and expand on the idea later on. Then it starts, as every conversation, with introducing yourself. That's the polite thing to do. So what I did for my book proposal is give a very quick overview of what the book was about, very, very short, 1 page only, and then who I was. And then I added some quotes from people I knew and who had commented on the quality of my work to put it after my author description. And the reason why was just to say, hey, I know you probably have never heard about me, but here are some nice things that other people are saying. It's a little bit like having testimonials on your website. Once you've said hello, you switch to establishing the book's potential. So there are three important sections here. The first one is why now? Establishing the timeliness of the book. Why wasn't this book published 10 years ago? And why wouldn't it be better published in 10 years from now? Why now? So it's really talking about the zeitgeist and maybe recent global events or local events, depending on the topic of the book, that are relevant to what you want to talk about. Which brings me to the second section, the target audience. This is where you explain who are those people that you want to help with your book. And I started with a very short paragraph that gave an overview, but then I broke it down. I said they were my existing fans, the ones that were already part of my community, but also creative professionals and knowledge workers, current and aspiring entrepreneurs, self-development nonfiction readers, and ambitious people going through life transitions. You can see here, every paragraph is very short, but this gives a really good overview of who are the kind of people I'm expecting to read the book. And finally, complementary titles. You will see in other book proposal that this is sometimes called a competition, like competitive overview, competitive research, or the rest of the market. I don't really like this because I feel like those titles are really complementary in the sense that people who read these books are quite likely to want to read my book. I think that's a lot more interesting. I'm not trying to steal market share from these authors. I want to grow the pie together. So here you can see that I mentioned 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, Deep Work by Cal Newport, Laura Vanderkam, Bruce Feiler, Tiago Forte. Those are all books that I feel like are complementary to Tiny Experiments. And so I shared them here. And again, you're just painting this market overview, this big picture for your publisher. When you're done with the market overview, this is when you actually switch to the actual content. So that was the table of content that I had in the book proposal. For those of you who have received the bonus, the Secret Marginalia edition, you will have seen what the current table of content looks like. I invite you afterwards, if you want to reopen this recording when you receive it, and you can kind of compare how it changed. You'll see that some of the things are similar, but that things have shifted and moved around a little bit, which again shows this point I made earlier that things don't have to be completely final at this stage. The point of the book proposal is to convince the publisher to work with you, but they're going to shape the book with you. In the overview of the book, you then write 1 to 2 paragraphs describing each of the chapters. You can see they're not all exactly the same length, but I followed roughly the same format every time, where it was a few lines explaining what I wanted to talk about here, and then bullet points for the rest of the chapters, just to keep it really short and sweet. And finally, sample material. Some people only include the introduction. Some people only chapter 1. I did both. Some advice that I got and I'm sharing with you, and I decided not to follow, and it still worked out for me. But some people told me that publishers prefer having a chapter in the middle because it's very easy to do something very exciting for the introduction, but it's much harder to write an exciting chapter right in the middle. And I didn't do that, and it was fine for me. But again, I'm sharing with you everything I learned from talking with other authors as well. So just know that that's an option as well. A note on design, that was mind-boggling to me because coming from a world of entrepreneurship, design, and marketing, I wanted my proposal to be as pretty as possible, to be visually appealing. My developmental editor told me, no, don't do this. It screams newbie in the industry, and like you don't know what the format is supposed to look like. It should be Times New Roman, 12-point font, and no design curator or anything, just keeping it very, very simple. And this way, you really let the text shine and you're not trying to distract or do anything else like that. So that was really surprising to me. I had started having different fonts and trying to make it really nice, a bit like a slide deck like this one, where you want the experience to be nice visually, but you're not supposed to do this. And a good developmental editor will also walk you through those little details, kind of insider knowledge from the industry that there's no way for you to know or to Google. So, a little summary of this section. How do you go from your curiosity to building a compelling pitch that you can then send to publishers? Step one is to transform your curiosity into a community. So, this is, as I explained, the step that will help you identify real world problems and interesting insights that can inspire you for the concept of your book. Step two is to find the right developmental editor to collaborate with. And this will help you turn your raw ideas into a compelling message. As I mentioned, there is a range of budget for this. And it could be as simple as hiring an editor who you meet with for 1 hour every month, just as a sparring partner to talk with. But I highly, highly recommend that you don't do this on your own and that you have someone who helps you structure your thoughts at this stage. And step three is to craft a compelling book proposal around those ideas in partnership with your developmental editor to communicate your message to publishers in an appropriate way. So now we're going to take a little self-discovery break. So everyone, I encourage you now to grab either a physical notebook if you have this, or open your note-taking app. Can be Notion, Roam, Obsidian, Logseq, so many options these days, doesn't matter. And Maria is going to put in the chat a little worksheet, which you should click on and make a copy of. Or if you're writing in a notebook, you can just do the questions on your notebook. Look at the questions. So I'm just going to walk you through very quickly through the 3 self-discovery questions. The first one is, what are 3 ideas, concepts, or questions you are deeply curious about and why? At this stage, don't necessarily think about ideas that could be good for a book. It's just things that you've been naturally exploring, even when no one's watching or nobody in your team is asking you to do some research. When you're left to your own devices with maybe just the internet or surrounded with books, what are the ideas, concepts, and questions that you are deeply curious about and why? The second question is, what are platforms where you might feel comfortable sharing your learning journey and why these platforms? As I mentioned, in my case, it was a newsletter and Twitter, but it could be really any platform where you feel comfortable. That could be even a WhatsApp group, Telegram group, that could be Instagram if you're more of a visual person creating your own podcast, that doesn't matter. And I put platforms plural here, but if there's really just one platform that makes sense for you, that's also completely fine. And the third question is, without aiming for perfection, that is not the goal here in such a short little self-discovery exercise, what could be a placeholder title for your book? So Maria is going to now share the link. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. You will have exactly 9 minutes in order to complete this exercise. I'm going to put my timer on, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But okay, let's start at 35. I'm going to put my timer on. New timer. 9 minutes. You have about 3 minutes per questions. As I put in the worksheet in the instructions, it's okay if you want to have a quick look at your notes for inspiration, but you have so little time to think about this that ideally let it come from your intuition rather than overthink it. Okay? So 9, and I will let you know in 9 minutes when we're done. Go. Time's up, everyone. Hands up. No cheating. We're done. Good. Great. We're going to do the same where, oh, actually, Albert, this is such a great idea. It's a long session. Let's do a little stretch also. I needed that too. Thank you for the inspiration, Albert. This is great. Good. Okay, let's do that little go exercise again. When I say go, you can put in the chat the answer to the question I'm going to ask. After going through this exercise, what is one word describing how you feel about the idea of writing a book? Everyone got the question? Ready? Go. Excited, curious, hopeful, intrigued, potentiality, excited, exciting, excited. Curious, exciting, excited. Ooh, Thor said ready. Potential. Pierre, thank you. Less likely. We have one person. It would be weird if everybody was excited. Olaf is excited. William is eager. Margarita, I love this. Life-giving. Energized, informed. Georgia feels different. Dimitri feels uncertainty. Exhilarating for Viviane. Possible. Another possible opportunity. Confident. Empowering. Karen says just wow, which is great. Clarity, hopeful, ready, inspired. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So again, those were just 9 minutes, and maybe for some of you, you've never spent any time thinking about this possibility. And I think that it's great that for some of you, actually, it brought you a little bit of clarity as to whether you want to do this or not. And for some people, the answer is no, actually. After going through this, I don't really feel like that's something for me. And that's great because the goal of this workshop is not necessarily to convince you that you should write a book. It's just for you to consider the question, and whatever answer comes up is completely fine. And even if the answer is no, I also hope that it will give you, like it did for me going through this process, a much deeper appreciation for books written by other authors, because now I can tell the amount of work that went into bringing this baby to life is really something I had no idea was necessary for this to happen. So deep appreciation. Great. So let's go through the second part and then we'll have our Q&A. I'm going to share my screen again. Welcome back. So now let's move on to the next phase, writing and editing, actually writing the book, which is also a very important part. So that's the very long journey to go from a blank page to a finished manuscript. Again, I'm going to describe to you how it went for me, but this is very similar for other authors I know who have written nonfiction books with traditional publishers. So this is what a typical week looked like for me when I was writing the book. I was also completing my PhD. So that's why you can see on Tuesday, lab day, working with the eye tracker, a meeting with my supervisors. But I also made sure that I always had at least 5 hours to work on the book every week. That may seem like a lot, that may seem like very little, depending on how much you enjoy writing and how much this is a part of your life already. But I've always loved writing. So for me, it actually didn't feel like enough very often. That was the minimum that I said, okay, I'm blocking this in my calendar. And if somehow I can find more little pockets of time, this is great. But minimum 5 hours. And this is what I did for many, many months. And usually, and again, the weeks are different. This was not a perfect routine that I was repeating week after week, but usually would look something like this. I would spend Monday morning doing more organization and notes and research. And the reason why was because I had my meeting with my developmental editor on Monday afternoon, and I didn't want to come empty-handed. Sometimes the previous week had very busy and I didn't write much, but I wanted to at least be able to come to that meeting with Sarah and have something to discuss with her. So that's the reason why it was more around organizing my notes and research on Monday morning. Then I had my meeting with Sarah and we would kind of decide what I would focus on in terms of writing for the rest of the week. She would review what I had produced the week before and we would have discussions. And sometimes it was very easy. She would say, great, just keep going. This is going in a really good direction. Sometimes I would come to the meeting and say, I feel completely stuck. Those are the two different directions I'm considering, and I have no idea which one is best. What do you think? And then you can see on Wednesday, which I always call my buffer day because I have a lot of other things going on and I try to keep that day as empty as possible every week so I can work on whatever is most pressing that week. So that week I had more book writing on Wednesday. And then Thursday is newsletter day. For those of you who are subscribed to the Nest Labs newsletter, I sit down in the morning and I put all of my notes together and write the little article. I had some training sometimes that were offered by Penguin. So that's what you see at the bottom at 6 p.m. on the Thursday. which I could not attend that week because I was conducting a research interview with someone who is featured in the book. That person here that week, I checked when I took the screenshot, is Ron Finley, who you might know as the guerrilla gardener. And that was one of the best interviews I did in the book because he gave me a tour of his garden in LA with his laptop on Zoom. We had an amazing conversation, and you will see that his interview is in one of the very first chapters of the book. Friday, more book writing and admin planning for NAS Labs, for the book, and for my PhD. So that's a typical week for me when I was working on the book. And it was mostly just me and my developmental editor at first. But once I had a first draft, I decided to bring in other people to give me more extensive feedback and to kind of burst that little bubble that we had with just me and my developmental editor. And those were beta readers. So I put a little message in my newsletter and I said, hey, by the way, if anyone wants to be a beta reader, send me an email. And then I selected a few people based on the books that they were interested in and previous interactions that we had to work with me and give me feedback on that first version. I sent them the document and I asked them to highlight what they loved, any pain points, parts that felt boring or confusing, things they struggled with, and comments on the overall narrative, whether everything made sense or not. And I got lots of feedback through lots of different formats. And this is why when I started going through this process of working with beta readers, which by the way, not all authors do, and some publishers will tell you, don't do this. This is a nightmare to manage. But I was saying, no, I actually want to do this. I have a very experimental approach to everything. There is no way I'm not working with beta readers for my book, but they warned me that this would be a little bit complicated to manage because every beta reader is not professionally trained to do this. That's the entire point. You're not paying an editor to give you feedback. You're sending your first draft to actual potential readers. So everyone is going to share their feedback in a way that feels most natural to them. So some people are going to just highlight the document with a legend that they have created themselves, and they'll explain anything in yellow is something that I liked, and then anything in pink is something that maybe was not as clear. Other people, you see, for some people might know Visa here because we're mutuals on Twitter. He really liked using those little emoticon reactions on Google Docs with the little fire and icons like this to tell me what he liked, and he added a few comments. As you can see, the comments were not always positive. Maddie said that she was getting a little bit bored somewhere. This is the entire point of it. I had Nivi, another person, who shared her comments through a spreadsheet also. So that was another different way of approaching it. And that's because she had to export her highlights from her Kindle. And then some people just sent me a very long email. And I'll touch a little bit more on that specific piece of feedback regarding the word liminal here that you can see on the screen. So lots of feedback, lots of formats. And if you decide to work with beta readers, you better be prepared to see this as a full project to manage with a dedicated folder, dedicated spreadsheet to track this. And just knowing that even if you give people some instructions, you're asking them to volunteer to read a very long document and give you feedback. So you can't be too prescriptive in terms of what feels most comfortable for them. And whatever format comes back to you, this is what you'll have to work with. And there's one piece of feedback that I got on the first version that changed everything for me, and I will be eternally grateful for. That piece of feedback, which I just went through all of my emails and I cannot find the actual quote, so I wrote that from memory, is I love every single chapter individually. However, if you ask me to tell a friend about the book, I would struggle to summarize the message in a couple of sentences. So a year ago, that's the feedback that I got from one of the beta readers. And the reason why I think is because I was so used to writing a newsletter where every week I would sit down and just write about something I thought was interesting, that the book ended up being a little bit of a patchwork of interesting ideas. And I still had a lot of work to go through in order to build a cohesive narrative, a red thread running throughout the entire book. Thanks to that piece of feedback and all of the other comments that I got from beta readers, I started revising the book and producing new versions that I kept on sending to beta readers until we were happy. This is a very iterative process. And if you remember the experimental cycle from the beginning, you'll see how similar this is. You conduct research, explore your ideas, gather sources, take notes, conduct interviews like I did with Ron Finley. You write, develop the themes, outline the content, you try to shape the narrative and draft those chapters. And then you collect and consolidate feedback from beta readers during the reviewing process. Based on that feedback, you revise your draft by editing the structure, refining the language, fixing errors, improving the flow. And sometimes that means conducting more research. Rinse and repeat until you're pretty happy, because let's face it, you will never be perfectly happy with your draft. But once you start getting less and less feedback from beta readers and they tell you that they really like it, at some point, or because you reached the deadline that the publisher gave you, then you need to just stop and say that that's it. That's the final manuscript. I want to take a second to just give a shout out to the beta readers for Tiny Experiments and say thank you so much for going through this entire process with me, which was sometimes a little bit painful and complicated, but I think the book is so much better thanks to you. So Bruna, Ida, Maddie, Monica, Nivi, Olivia, Oren, Sarah, Suzanne, and Visa, thank you so much for being my beta readers for Tiny Experiments. This is the content warning that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. This is not something I've ever discussed on Twitter or anywhere else. And even though I'm going to share the recording afterwards, I would really like it if you didn't share that more widely outside of this call. The topic of this content warning is suicide. So if that's something that for personal reasons is triggering to you, feel free to mute until you see the screen changing and go to the next slide. And then you can come back. I will be done talking about this. I mentioned on the page where you could register to access this Behind the Book workshop that there was a part of the book that was considered a little bit too intense and triggering by my developmental editor, and we ended up cutting out of the book. And that's the part where I talk about how at age 14, I decided to die, as you can see highlighted here on the screen. And I described in pretty detailed fashion that experience and how it shaped me. And that felt to me connected to some parts of the book. The reason why was because before I started experimenting, I really felt like the world was empty and had no meaning. And for me, experimenting has been a way to really reclaim that sense of agency and playfulness that I now experience on an everyday basis by really being an actor into the world and shaping it and playing with it. We decided, though, that I think that was on page 3 or 4 in the introduction, that might be a little bit of too an intense way to start the book, and maybe not what people would expect to see when they buy something that is supposed to be, again, a little bit more light and fun. So we cut that part of the book, and I ended up communicating the same message using another story, another part of my life that was not as intense and potentially triggering to other people. To me, that was a very interesting exercise in exploring the limits of authenticity and how much is okay to share in your book. And that doesn't mean that this is what you should do or the decision you should make with your book. But again, I'm only sharing those experiences so you can proactively ask yourself these questions and ask yourself, how much do I want to share? Where's the limit here? Where's the boundary? And really be intentional in making those decisions of what you include and what you don't include. That's an extreme example, but I hope it makes you think about that and this big question for yourself and for your project should you decide to write a book. End of the content warning for anyone who decided to mute that part of the presentation. So as I've mentioned, you've noticed that the title has changed. It used to be Liminal Minds. That was the title in the book proposal that I sent to publishers and that resulted in an auction for the book. And now it's Tiny Experiments. So what happened to the title? What happened is that I love asking questions to people. I'm never satisfied with just taking my assumptions for granted. And so even months after I had started writing the book, about maybe 6 months after I had secured the book deal with Penguin and I had been writing the book for quite a long time already, I still had this nagging feeling that maybe Liminal Minds was not the right title. And so I started asking around and I sent WhatsApp messages to a bunch of people I knew. And I tried to pick people that I felt like were quite smart, quite curious, and who probably would know what the word liminal meant. And those were the answers I got. My friend, who's a machine learning engineer from Imperial College, said that he had to Google it and that it took him a little bit of time to compute what that meant. Another friend of mine, who's a director of marketing at Google, felt like it was not really accessible to a broad audience. Another friend who's a psychedelics practitioner also had to Google it. And another friend just said, "What does it mean? I guess I'm intrigued, but the resistant, confused kind of intrigued." So I felt like we had to go back to the drawing board, and that's what I told my publisher. I sent them a presentation, an entire deck explaining why we had to consider changing the title. That previous slide with the comments from my friend is a screenshot from that deck that I sent to my publisher. And this is the page that comes right after with some of the ideas that I brainstormed afterwards. So these are all of the titles that I considered for Tiny Experiments. And you can see Tiny Experiments is in there, not even one of the first ones, but was part of those candidates. What I did afterwards is conduct a survey in the newsletter, and I had 350 people who replied. I asked them to rate each title from 1 to 5, and these were the results. If you look at the numbers at the bottom, 76.2 shows you that the top result was Tiny Experiments. But I was not completely sure because it was still a small sample, and some other titles like Nonlinear Living also did quite okay. So I took it a step further and I decided to run ads on Instagram and Facebook to test those top titles that had emerged through the survey. Tiny Experiments, Wired for Change, Nonlinear Living, and a couple more options. And again, Tiny Experiments came out on top, but it was a very, very, very close call with Nonlinear Living. Nonlinear Living and Tiny Experiments were the last two titles that I considered, and I decided to talk to a few, again, friends and colleagues and people I had connected with on Twitter and the Nest Labs community over the years. This is the advice that they gave me. And I literally went back to the messages that we exchanged to copy paste these. Nicholas Cole said, "Be clear, not clever." Tiago told me, "Meet your readers where they are." And I think the advice that really, really changed my mind and made me decide to go with Tiny Experiments is Stephanie, who said, "Imagine yourself repeating this title over and over again for the next 5 years." She mentioned that I had to say that title out loud on podcasts and conversations in any situation where my book would come up. And somehow, Nonlinear Living didn't feel right, but Tiny Experiments did. And ultimately, your title is like a Trojan horse. You want a title that is fun and exciting, and it doesn't necessarily have to capture the entirety of the content of the book. To me, Liminal Minds captured more of the essence of a lot of the topics that I talk about, and Tiny Experiments is just one part of the mindset shift that I talk about in the book. But having this title that is like simpler, more engaging, more interesting allows me for people to buy the book and then have access to all of the other tools instead of trying to explain the entire book in the title. So your book title is like a Trojan horse. This is not relevant for people who have a title at the beginning and don't have to change it. But if, like me, you had to go through that process, then I went through the draft and I just rewrote some sections and reorganized some part of the structure to make sure that the title was aligned with the actual toolkit that I was presenting in the book. And voila, I was done after more than a year of intense writing, at least 5 hours a week, writing on the plane and realizing that ink pens can explode, as you can see on the photo on the left. I finally submitted the manuscript in spring of this year. And it was an amazing feeling. And I decided to commemorate this moment to wear the exact same dress right now that I'm wearing on the photo that we took when I submitted the manuscript at the time. Once you've submitted your manuscript, starts the production process because yes, you think you're done, but really you're not done yet. And this is actually a really fun part of the process. I'm really enjoying it. So first, you're going to start working on the covers. So my editor sent me some options. And I kind of liked the first few ones that they sent me, but I wasn't sure that we were there yet. So I asked them to come up with more ideas. And Oh, sorry, actually, I did test those covers before deciding to ask for more ideas. So I had this intuition that we were not quite there yet, but I decided to test it. Some of you have actually answered that survey. I sent it again in the newsletter, and I asked everyone to tell me what they thought. And there wasn't really a clear winner here. So I asked my publisher and their design team to go back to the drawing board and generate more covers. And I didn't expect them to really be so generative here, but in total, they came up with 21 covers. And you can see them all here. Again, I have never shared this outside of my close circle of collaborators. Those are the 21 covers that we considered while working on the cover for Tiny Experiments. You can see that cover 3 is actually the closest one to where we ended up going in terms of direction for the cover, but there were a lot of different options. I'm just very curious. This would be fun to do. I'm going to say go as usual. Can everyone, not knowing, it's hard to ignore in hindsight, obviously, not knowing what we picked, what number would you go with? What is your favorite cover out of all of the ones that were designed by Penguin? 7, 3, 9, 14, 3, 3, 7, 3, 3, 18, 3, 7, and 3, 10, 3, 10, 3, 3, and 8, 7, 18. Okay, this is great. 3 is coming up a lot, but again, you all know what the cover looks like already. So I don't think this is a really good experiment we're running here. We already know the answer. So those are the 21 covers that we tested. And voila, that's what we ended up with. The title is Tiny Experiments. The subtitle is How to Live Freely in the Goal-Obsessed World. And the cover is a slight variation on cover number 3 that you saw before. Once you're done with the outside of the book, you need to work on the inside of the book. What your publisher is going to do is send you a PDF with the interior layout of the book, not the entire book, just some select pages so you can see what it looks like. In my case, I was honestly so impressed and happy with the first version that they sent me that I only made very small tweaks. But you might have more iterations than I did when going through this. What took more rounds was the copy editing, because in between that final draft that I sent and actually having something that is ready to be sent out to people, there was still a lot of work. And this is where working with a traditional publisher can actually be interesting, because I had a team of at least 5 or 6 people helping me with this. Someone on their team went through every single reference in the book, clicked on every link, made sure that none of them were dead, and then check that what the reference was saying and what I said in the book actually matched. So you can really trust when you read Tiny Experiments that what I write is really referenced with a citation where the content says the exact same thing. This amount of work would have been a lot for me to do to go back and double check that this was the case, or I would have had to hire someone. There was also someone who really checked every single word. Because I live in the UK and this is published first in the US, I had word sentences with a mix of British spelling and US spelling, so someone fixed that for me. They really went through every single detail and made sure that there was no typo left and that everything was good in terms of content. Until one day, which was not so long ago, I got an email saying in a kind of a stern way, but please make sure the author understands that this is a confirming review only, which means we're done. This is final. I can't make any more changes except corrections if something is really wrong. And then you're done. It's such a weird feeling. Now it's in the hand of the editor to print and send into the world, and there's nothing else that you can change. And you move into the last phase, publication and promotion, the marketing to get your book in the right hands. So I built a little landing page, which you've all seen if you're here today. And I asked a few people I knew and some people I didn't know. I cold emailed them to ask if they wanted to have an early PDF copy of Tiny Experiments, and if they liked it, to give me a blurb so I could put it on the website. Then, in order to drive pre-orders, which is a very important part of getting on some of those lists and increase the visibility of the book, I decided to create also some incentive bonuses for people who would be early supporters. That includes all of you. So thank you so much. And I put that on the website and try to make it as clear as possible for people to understand what they would get if they ordered now rather than waiting for the book to come out in March. To launch the book, I wanted to create a video, and I had no idea how to do this. How do people launch their book on YouTube? So we did a little YouTube survey, just literally searching on YouTube how people launch their book and looked at different ways of doing this. And I took a lot of inspiration from different people, different videos in order to write the script for mine and record it and edit it. We spent quite a bit of time brainstorming thumbnail concepts. This feels so cringe for me to show you, but I decided I was going to show you everything. But these are some of the ideas for the thumbnail that we explored until we landed on the final thumbnail that you can see on my YouTube channel. That's the final thumbnail, final title. And what was really interesting for me in this process is the success of this video. More than 300% more popular than the average of my usual videos, which shows that when you spend a lot of time and energy into thinking about the thumbnail and thinking about the content, you can actually have some form of success on YouTube, which please don't take any advice from me on this. I'm not good at YouTube. This is a one-off, and I don't think I would be able to reproduce it because I have no idea exactly what worked better, except that maybe my community was excited about the book coming out. I sent an email to everyone on the day, which included that YouTube video as well as a link to pre-order. And I tried to make it as useful as possible by including some of the information on the creative process already. Here's a bit of a sneak peek for this workshop that you're attending right now. Posted on Instagram and posted on Twitter as well, where it was very well received. What was nice is that that video took a lot of time and energy to create, but then it was easy to just convert it into different formats for those different channels. And so now, what's next? So we just received literally yesterday the advanced reader copies for the book. And so I haven't seen them yet. They're at my publisher. I should receive them tomorrow. But those are photos that my publisher sent me. And what we're going to do is send these to people who tend to write or publish content about books. So that's influencers, that's journalists, that's any kind of thought leader that writes about personal development, psychology, mental models, etc. We're going to send them those advanced reader copies, ARCs, in the hope that they like it and that maybe they write about it, which would also help with the visibility of the book. And I want to say that none of this would be possible without the many people who have helped me. I hope this was fully transparent during this entire presentation, but I did not do any of this on my own. Many people helped me. There is Maria, who's in the chat right now, helping you all with any questions that you have. Mame is also in the chat here. Joe, Lisa Dimona, my agent, who has been helping me from the beginning. Stephanie, who gave me that piece of advice, telling me, hey, remember, you'll have to say this title over and over again for many, many years to come. Jacob, to the right, my editor at Penguin. Sarah, at the bottom right, my developmental editor. Yufa, bottom left corner, who created the website. And Farah, who I think a lot of you have talked to, right? Because she's the one managing all of the pre-order bonuses and answering all of the queries that we get over email. So I just want to say thank you to all of these people and all of the other ones that didn't make it to this slide, but this really takes a team to make it happen. And now I want to share 3 lessons I learned from writing, producing, and promoting this nonfiction book. The first lesson, as you've seen in the previous slide, is to surround yourself with smart collaborators. Each phase is going to require a lot of specialist knowledge, which you probably don't have. So just focus on crafting a great book and let others help you for every other aspect. The second one is to focus on the current most pressing question. It can feel really overwhelming if you try to think 5 steps ahead because there's so many moving parts. So really just focus on what you need to do right now. And don't worry, there will be a lot of time afterwards to get to those other parts. And third, and lastly, use a mix of data and intuition. As you've seen throughout this journey, I did a lot of testing, a lot of experimenting, but a lot of times, some of the most interesting questions that I had, such as starting testing the title, came from my intuition that maybe something was not quite right, or maybe something was worth exploring. So rely on data to make decisions, but also trust your intuition as a way to explore interesting questions. And ultimately, remember that all of the choices you make, you need to feel great about and you need to feel proud, because a book is something that is going to be into the world, in the world with other people for many years to come. And finally, 3 ways to support the successful launch of Tiny Experiments. If anything in this workshop has been helpful to you, consider these. You could either host a mini book club. You would just need to get 9 other people to join for reading the book together. And remember, if you haven't seen on the page, that if you order at least 10 books, that gives you access to a virtual appearance where I can join your book club meeting and just give a little talk. We can do a little Q&A. You can just let me know what you need, and we can make it a fun experience that we share together. Second, you can request to host a team training at your company. So maybe your manager, or maybe you have a learning and development lead somewhere in your company. So you can ask them to schedule a Tiny Experiments workshop where I'm going to teach you how to develop an experimental mindset based on the principles of the book. And this option is available for at least 30 books. And finally, I know those first 2 options are not available to everyone. Really just telling your colleagues, your friends, and your family, spreading the word in any way possible, forwarding the newsletter, social media, mentioning it in conversations, all of that is so helpful. So thank you so much for all of your support. And now let's do a little Q&A session. Okay, great. What's the timeline if you're not doing a PhD in parallel? Looking at different authors that I know, I don't think you can compress the timeline that much. I would say 2 years, and the fastest I've seen is a year and a half. So it's still quite long, 18 months. That really assumes that you're full-time on your book, I think. It's a lot of research. And especially, again, this workshop is about nonfiction books. You will want to do research, you will want to conduct interviews. Just scheduling this can take a long time. And there are lots of rounds of reviews, beta reading, etc. 18 months if you're really efficient and super focused on only writing your book. How adaptable would this process be for fiction? Oh, interesting, actually, because I just mentioned this is for nonfiction. I have no idea, to be honest. I actually used to write fiction as a kid. When I was a teenager, I was running the largest online community for young writers in France, where we were all writing fiction, and actually submitted a few novels to publishers at the time. But somehow I loved writing the first draft, and whenever they came back with feedback to edit anything, I never replied. So I've never published a novel before. And so just from a data point of one person, I don't think the process is similar at all. The one thing I know, for example, is that for a nonfiction book, you just need to submit the book proposal as I just shown you, and then you write the book. Whereas for fiction books, they expect you to submit the entire book already written. Just that completely changes the process. So I don't think it's very adaptable. For collaborators as well, I'm just thinking out loud here, but just having read interviews from fiction authors, a lot of them work on their own. So everything I said about surrounding yourself with collaborators, I'm not quite sure it applies in the same way to someone writing a novel. So not very applicable, I think. You hired an agent and a developmental editor, 2 different people. Or is the developmental editor and agent research? Yeah. So your developmental editor and your agent are 2 different people. Your developmental editor, you're going to pay like a freelancer. And so that's why there are so many different options. You can say, hey, I'm going to pay you $100 an hour, and we only need to meet for 1 hour every month. That works. That's still developmental editing. Or you could work with a superstar one that's going to cost you a lot more money. That's the developmental editor. The agent is going to get paid 15% of whatever the publisher pays you. So you don't pay ever anything in advance to an agent. If an agent asks you for money in advance, it's a scam. They will work to try and place your book proposal with a publisher, and they will work really hard to get you a really good advance, because that's how they make money. The nice thing about working with a developmental editor that is a bit more established, rather than taking a random person on Upwork, for example, is that very often they're connected to agents. So if they decide to work with you as a developmental editor, they might already have in mind a couple of agents where they can then send your book proposal to. In my case, I was introduced by a friend to their agent, and so those two things kind of happened in parallel, but the agent still waited until they saw the book proposal before confirming that they wanted to work with me. So start with the book proposal and then find the agent, potentially with the help of your developmental editor, or via same looking at the acknowledgement section of those books because the agent is always mentioned in there, or going on Google and trying to find them. Or if you have friends who are authors, asking them if you can get an introduction. I want to give a chance to anyone who's on the call, if you want to raise your hand. If anyone would like the opportunity to ask me a question directly, I'll just keep going through the questions that I have in the doc for now, and then just raise your hand for now, and I'll go through a few of the people who raised their hands. How did I find my beta readers? Through the newsletter. So all of the surveys that I ran, the beta readers, when I asked people for feedback on the different covers, all of that was through the newsletter. And the reason why is that I wanted to focus on my core community first, because I deeply believe that if you write something that resonates with your community, then it will resonate with more people. But you should focus on that. You can't really write a book for everyone. So write a book for the audience that you know. Okay, we have a few people who raised their hands. James, you want to ask your question?
Zuzana was actually first to raise her hand, so I'll defer to her and then I'll go second.
Oh, sorry. You're showing first on my screen somehow. Okay, Susanna, you want to go?
Hi, thank you, James. That's so kind of you. Thank you. My question is, as a non-native English speaker, was it hard for you to write in English, or did you have any imposter syndrome issues? What was it like? Because I'm a non-native English speaker, and this is one of the things that I'm like, is my English good enough?
That's a very, very good
Thank you.
question. Yeah, thank you. That was a big motivation for me to work with a developmental editor as well, because I felt more confident that she would catch any word, turn of phrase in the way I was writing. So I think this is also something that a developmental editor can help with. And the nice thing is that when you work with a traditional publisher and with an agent, your agent is not going to submit your book proposal if they don't think it's good. They will keep on giving you feedback until they feel proud also of sending this out. So what I did in terms of managing my imposter syndrome was that I kept repeating myself. It's okay. Lisa will send it out when it's good. And she knows what she's doing. She knows her job. So if she thinks it's good, it's probably good enough. And I had this little hashtag that I used all the time. And now I know a few other authors who work with the same agent, and they have adopted this hashtag as well, which is hashtag in Lisa we trust. So whenever she says that something is good enough, we're like, okay, it's good enough. So that's how I manage imposter syndrome in my case. And again, going back to this point of working with smart collaborators that you can trust. And then even if you're not quite sure, they will tell you. So James, you want to go now?
Hi. So I had a question about promotion because, you have a much larger, I assume, global audience than I have. I have a newsletter that I write, but people around the world have studied with me and have been encouraging me to write a book. And I'm playing around with this idea to have people in those communities approach their local bookshops to get the book and also then host readings where they become the reader because they're committed. And then those are the people that I'm going to interview for additional content for the audiobook so that the audiobook is different. And it just seems like you have the potential to do that manifold, many times bigger. So I wonder if, but I didn't know if like working with a traditional publisher, if they don't like you doing things like that. My first book is being self-published, but the second one that I'm in the works of, I'm hoping to find a publisher. But I just wondered what that idea, if that resonates with you, or I don't know. Anyway.
I don't know if
Great.
you saw, but Vivian was like, yes, she really liked the idea. So I think this is a great idea, but you raise a really good point, is that if you work with a traditional publisher, you are going to have a bit less flexibility. In my case, honestly, I've been amazed at how much flexibility I've had. The fact that uh, they let me test all of the different covers and that I had a say on a lot of creative decisions was amazing, but that is not the experience of some other authors that I know. And also, even if they want to be flexible, they have bigger teams and processes in place that can make it hard for them to make some things happen. So what you're describing with the audiobook, for example, I don't think it would be possible for me to do with Penguin at this stage if that was not initially part of the book proposal. So either you're very clear at the book proposal stage that this is how you want to craft this product, this book, and this is how you envision the audiobook, and then they basically buy into this vision and decide to work with you, and I think you're good to go. But if midway you say, actually, I was thinking we can do it this way or that way, it's going to be very hard to do that with a traditional publisher. And so that's one advantage of self-publishing, is that you have complete flexibility in terms of making changes. With self-publishing these days, if it's printed on demand, you can even change the text after the book has been live and published. If someone gets a copy, notices a typo, you can fix it, re-upload the PDF, and then it's fixed for anyone else who buys the book. Obviously not possible with a traditional publisher. So there are absolutely restrictions, yes. And the idea resonates, yes. Challenging with the traditional publisher, I think. Great, thank you. So apparently I'm not seeing people in the right order, so I'm sorry if I'm rude, but let's go with Natalie.
Oh, hello. A wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for organizing all this. I have two questions. I don't know if they're totally related, but I'm curious to know if it's going to be translated in French. And the other thing, is it aligned with your thesis? Like, because you said you're finishing your thesis, is the book similar or is it a very different thesis that you have?
Yeah, so it is going to be translated in French at Erol. I don't know if you know that publishing house. The reason why it was very important for me, and I actually barely negotiated for the French rights. I was just so happy that someone would publish it in French, is because my mom doesn't speak English. So when the book comes out in March, she won't be able to read it. But later next year, when it's translated in French, she will be able to. And yeah, it's just, I'm getting a little bit, yeah. But it's very important for me. My mom stopped school when she was 12, and she worked in factories and as a house cleaner. So for me at this stage to publish a traditional book and do a PhD is just something quite incredible for her to witness. And I would love for her to have a copy that she can actually read. So it was super important for me. And I was just like, when someone like, can we publish it in French? I just said, yes, 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 let's do it. So later next year, it will be available in France. And for your second question, it's not related to my PhD at all. My PhD is looking at ADHD, and my second book, if I write a second book, might be aligned with what I did with my PhD. But I felt like I had to finish the research first because I didn't know what the results were until I was done. So it would have been a bit weird writing the book while doing the PhD. So the book is very much, Tiny Experiments is very much more of a distillation of all of the work I've done at Nest Labs in the past 5 years. And then I might take all of the work I have done in the past few years with my PhD and turn that into a book as well. TBD.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Margarita.
Well, hi. Thank you so much. This has been a delightful presentation. My question is about, I'm not sure, because I was particularly curious about this one, about the auction process, because it's not, well, I've never published a book, so, but in any case, I had never seen like, this process. I never really heard about a nonfiction book going through an auction process. So I'm curious about that. And I imagine that's when the work of the agent comes in, right? So I'd like to hear about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think you can get your book to auction without an agent.
Okay.
The way it works is that your agent, if they're good and connected, they will create almost like a sense of excitement, almost FOMO, in between different publishers, where you really want publishers to feel like, I really need this book. And instead of going with the first offer that you get, you tell people to hold off, that we're going to wait and see until we hear from everyone. And if you have enough interest, if you have several publishers that make an offer, you can then go back to all of them and say, you know what, we had enough interest that we're going to run an auction. So we did that in the US. You don't need that many publishers. We had 3 publishers that were involved in the one in the US, and then 8 publishers that were involved in the one in the UK. And honestly, I was just so impressed with the work of my agent. A big part of it, because it really needs to be a win-win situation. It's not about making a publisher buy your book and then them regretting it. It's really about finding the right publishers that would naturally be excited about the book, finding this perfect match, and ideally finding several of them. So there's, again, this little sense of healthy competition so you can have the best outcome for your book. And I was in awe of how Lisa went through this process with so much grace, and which I think is a testament to how much expertise she has, and she's a veteran, really. I would not necessarily aim for that as a necessary outcome that you want to have for your book. If that
Exactly.
happens, it's fantastic. It's a really good outcome, but this is not the norm. So I think as an outcome, you should try and find a good
Just get
fit.
published.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
That would be the goal usually.
Just one publisher, who is going to be a really good creative partner to bring your book to life. If it happens that several of them are interested and your book goes to auction, this is amazing, but quite rare.
hmm Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, nobody else is raising their hands right now, so I'm going to, oh, we're at time already. We are at time. Wow, that went so fast. So for anyone watching the recording, I apologize that I haven't been able to go through all of the questions that you have sent beforehand. I will send an email and try to create a little FAQ in a Google Doc with anything that I could not answer live during this meeting. So nobody feels like they will miss anything if they leave now. And I want to thank you all for joining today. This was an absolute pleasure to get to see all of your faces. Please, again, let me know if you have any questions, if you're interested in running a book club, hosting a training, or anything like that. Email tinyexperiments@nestlabs.com. We would be so happy to help. And yeah, I look forward to keeping on sharing the journey with you through the newsletter. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.